As he kept all of his focus on Ukraine, Vladimir Putin didn't feel the blade slowly kissing his back. Up the blade went, slowly but surely, until finally, it was plunged into the Russian leader's spine. A massive betrayal has just happened, and it's been done by a country that Putin thought he had in his pocket: Armenia. Proving that nobody fears Russia anymore, Armenia has backstabbed Putin. Election results don't favor the Kremlin. Threats aren't working anymore. Russia just lost Armenia, and all that Putin can do is watch. On June 8th, the news broke that Putin and Russia had utterly failed in their attempts to tamper with Armenia's elections. What may go down as the most important election in decades for Armenia resulted in Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party securing 49.8% of the vote. Putin's favorite party, the Strong Armenia Alliance Group, managed just 23.2% of the vote. That was enough to put them in second place, though at less than half of what Pashinyan's party achieved, that second-place vote will feel like a dagger plunged right into Putin's back. Russia's leader thought he'd done enough. Dirty tactics were supposed to decide the Armenian elections in Russia's favor, but the country's people have just collectively stood up and told Putin where to stick his election interference. And there was plenty of that interference. As The Economist points out, Armenia's elections were conducted under the black cloud of Russia banning the import of many of the goods that it purchases from Armenia. Water, roses, wine, cherries, strawberries, and even cognac were on the ban list as Putin tried to send a message: vote how I want, or Armenia loses untold millions, if not billions of dollars in trade with Russia. And Putin's threat was credible, as the Observatory of Economic Complexity points out. Russia is one of Armenia's largest export partners, ranking second among the country's buyers, with $3.14 billion worth of imports annually. Russia also sells a lot to Armenia, delivering $9.24 billion worth of goods and services to Armenia every year. Putin was piling on the pressure in the only way that he knows how to ensure that the Armenian elections ended up going in his favor. He wanted to create fear, not of a rampaging Russian army. Armenia was supposed to be a friend, not a potential foe. No, Putin wanted everyday Armenians to fear the economic issues that could arise if they decided to turn their back on Russia and vote for a prime minister who has been slowly moving the country toward the west and further away from Putin's grasp. None of it worked. The threats, the intimidation, and the trade bans all resulted in nothing, as Putin could do nothing but watch as the majority of Armenians rejected Russification. This is a huge win. Not just for Armenia, but the entire Western resistance to Russian influence, and in terms of how it's another sign that Putin's geopolitical reach doesn't extend anywhere near as far as Russia's leader wants you to think. Pashinyan made it clear why this vote matters so much for Armenia. The Armenian people voted for regional prosperity and cooperation, the Prime Minister declared. A former journalist who entered office back in 2018 after helping to lead a peaceful uprising against the Kremlin-friendly government of old. Pashinyan has been a constant thorn in Putin's side ever since. He is a reminder to Putin that he can't have things all his own way, even in relatively small countries where Russia's tactics of influence have a chance of working. For 8 years, Pashinyan has been seeking closer ties with the West, including the European Union and the US, and he has also worked to mend fences with historical rivals, all to create a closer and more unified nation. Putin hates unity. With unity comes the collapse of Russia's main strategy of exploiting division, and on June 8th, the Armenian people showed Russia that they are still unified behind a leader who is guiding them further and further away from Russia's influence. But as big a win as this is for Armenia itself, some might say that it's an even bigger win for the Western powers that are trying to force Putin into realizing that he isn't as powerful as he thinks he is. In the wake of the results, French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the Armenian people's collective decision, noting that it highlights a shift toward deeper European integration. More support came from the UK's ambassador Alexandra Cole, who praised the way the election was conducted and pledged the UK's support in maintaining Armenia's democratic institutions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the result too, stating that he was eager to deepen ties with the country as he urged the EU to engage deeper with Armenia as it follows the path of Western reform. And speaking of the EU and Europe as a whole, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said that the results showed that the spirit of the Velvet Revolution you led in 2018 is alive and well, in a message to Pashinyan. while pointing out the EU had offered a $58 million aid package to Armenia on June 4th to counter Russia's attempt at economic blackmail with the promise of more to come in the future. These reactions tell the story of what Pashinyan's victory on June 8th really means. Every enemy of Russia is happy that Pashinyan won, which tells you just how massive this result was. But as for Russia, let's just say that Putin isn't best pleased about what he sees as a massive betrayal by a country that he thought he could manipulate. We spoke about Putin's pressure tactics a few minutes ago. Those tactics extended far beyond the economic blackmail that was supposed to sway Armenian voters in the days ahead of them entering the polling stations. Russia tried plenty more beyond that, with some of its tactics being more covert than others. In a May 29th report, Reuters revealed that Russia had intensified a disinformation campaign designed to sway votes in favor of pro-Russian candidates. That's according to 5 Western intelligence officials, as well as documents revealed to Reuters, the outlet says. On top of this campaign, Russia went down the far more overt route of developing a scheme to transport tens of thousands of Armenian Russians into Armenia solely so they could vote in the election. The intelligence officials Reuters spoke to revealed that Russia had priced up the plan and came to a figure of $50 million to transport 100,000 voters. By the middle of May, Russia had reportedly even drawn up regional quotas as it tried to determine where best to place these migrant voters ahead of the election. Reuters says it isn't clear if Russia ever managed to follow through on this planning, but now it doesn't matter. Putin lost and Pashinyan won. Pressure from Russia also came in the form of vague threats and attempts to push Armenia into referendums that Putin hoped would disrupt the vote even more. At the beginning of April, Putin issued a very public warning to Armenia, claiming that the country now had to choose between the European Union and Russia. But it should be obvious and honestly stated up front that membership in a customs union with both the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union is impossible, Putin said in a warning delivered straight to Pashinyan. The Eurasian Economic Union is a loose economic bloc including Armenia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. It was established in 2015 and is supposed to encourage free trade and movement of labor between all members. Russia lords over the group, with Putin's warning implying that he would cut Armenia out of it if it ventured closer to the EU with a vote that didn't go Russia's way. Still, none of it worked. Armenia's people have shot a message right back to Putin that they aren't scared of the big bully of Europe. If losing access to one union to gain access to one far larger and more supportive is the price that Armenia has to pay to keep Russia out of its politics, then the country's people have just indicated that they are willing to pay it. And then there's Samvel Karapetyan. Who's that, you hear you ask? He's the leader of the pro-Russian Strong Armenia party that came a distant second in the country's elections, and he isn't happy. Tantrums are being thrown in the pro-Kremlin mansion of a man who was all set up to become Putin's lapdog. But before we get into that, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. This is precisely why we make these videos, to expose how power moves and why it all matters. If you like what you see, remember to subscribe so you catch more of our videos. In the wake of Armenia's elections, Karapetyan was interviewed in his massive mansion, where he currently sits under house arrest after being accused of calling for his country's government to be overthrown. Karapetyan denies the charge, and now that he's lost the election, he's going to be spending a lot of time getting even more closely acquainted with the walls that have surrounded him for weeks. Karapetyan raged that the election results were a disgrace, as he claimed that 70 members of his team had been detained and over 700 people were arrested during the election. They decided to engage in inexplicable actions on election day. There has never been a case in world history where vote counting is interrupted and officials say they will announce the results at 9 a.m. the next morning. Seeing that their results were declining every minute, they stopped the count, the failed candidate claimed. There appears to be no evidence of these allegations or of the electoral fraud that Karapetyan now alleges took place. The leader of Armenia's most prominent pro-Russia party is now calling for the result to be annulled, giving him another chance to benefit from Russia's blackmail, disinformation, and migrant voter tactics. Putin hasn't said much, but his favorite mouthpiece, Dmitry Peskov, has spoken for Russia's leader, as he made vague allegations of violations during Armenia's elections. Seriously, Peskov, are you of all people going to accuse another country of holding unfair elections? You live in Russia under Vladimir Putin. Granted, that means if anybody knows what election violations look like, it's you. But the only evidence of violations happening in Armenia's elections comes from what Russia has spent months trying to do to sway the vote in its favor. Of course, all of this is nonsense. The Council of Europe reports that Armenia's voters were offered a genuine choice between candidates in the country's elections, even though the elections took place under challenging circumstances. Despite the arrests and Russian interference, the election process itself was governed by revised election-related laws and regulations that provide a sound basis for democratic elections, the council said. The Economist also reports that the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe labeled the election transparent and efficient. The reality that Karapetyan has to accept is that getting into bed with Russia gave him and his party a very bad case of fleas. Nothing in the wannabe leader's policy packet and messaging appealed enough to Armenia's people to convince them to change course, even as Russia's disinformation gremlins worked away in the background. All that Karapetyan had to offer was tired nationalism, a promise that Armenia will build closer ties to Russia when most of the country wants the opposite, and a weird proposal for the establishment of a Ministry of Sex to tackle falling fertility and ensure there will be no unsatisfied women. Karapetyan thought this big idea would be the climax that the Armenian people needed. In the end, it was a flaccid failure. The big question now is what happens in the future. Armenia's people have made their decision, and Pashinyan is still in. One thing that's important to point out is that Russia is bruised, but it's still going to try to influence the direction that Armenia takes from here on out. The European Policy Center points that out, noting that even as Armenia has voted west, it still can't disentangle itself from Russia, at least not immediately. Pashinyan won a little under 50% of the vote, which is shy of the two-thirds majority that he needs to make alterations to Armenia's constitution, thus leaving the door open for Russian exploitation. That also means that Pashinyan can't remove the vague claims to ownership over Nagorno-Karabakh in that constitution, which Azerbaijan says needs to be removed if it's to sign a peace treaty with Armenia. Russia is also still an important trading partner for Armenia, and Putin will likely try to lean even more heavily on that fact to make the first few months of Pashinyan's latest term more painful than they ought to be. But though these challenges can't be ignored, the knife in Putin's back feels so deep because Russia's leader knows that the winds of change are coming for Armenia. We mentioned Azerbaijan. That nation, along with Turkey, has a contentious relationship with Armenia that is fuel for the Kremlin fire. Russia thrives on discontent and division. It loves the chaos that comes when nations disagree with one another, because that chaos creates opportunities. But that chaos may start slowly fading away over the next few years. A peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan isn't going to be signed as long as the latter has its key condition in place. But as the Carnegie Endowment points out, opportunities for deeper Western integration should be taken now. July's NATO summit in Ankara offers Turkey a chance to organize a meeting between the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and major Western powers such as the US that could start to help the frost thaw. Let trade begin and people move, the endowment says, as it argues that Pashinyan's victory is one step closer to the normalization that needs to happen in Armenia for Russia's influence to be dispelled. Those are the sorts of geopolitical moves that Putin would hate to see, but they won't come immediately. What is more immediate is that Armenia has signaled that it wants to cement its shift away from Putin and his twisted politics. Pashinyan even made that point in his victory speech. In the same breath where he said that Armenians had voted for peace, prosperity, and regional cooperation, Armenia's Prime Minister also said, "I hope this will be met with a positive response from Turkey and Azerbaijan." That makes it pretty clear where Pashinyan's priorities lie, and they're not with Putin. Pashinyan also has a direct endorsement from US President Donald Trump, who The Guardian reports has called Armenia's Prime Minister a great friend and leader. All of these are bad signs for Russia. But what would hurt Putin the most is if the European Union decided to pull the trigger on Armenian membership. Under Pashinyan, Armenia passed a law to begin the process of gaining membership to the EU, which happened about a year after the group said it would be willing to welcome Armenia. About a month before Armenia's pivotal election, von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa also released a joint declaration where they said they were committed to institutional integration, security cooperation, economic modernization, connectivity investment, and political backing, as Armenia works to make itself more EU-compatible, the Center for European Policy Studies points out. All signs are pointing to Armenia drawing ever closer to EU membership. If the EU decides to fast-track the accession process, it not only gains a new ally, but would deliver a massive blow to Putin's goal of controlling huge swathes of Europe through coercion and disinformation. And so we come back to Putin. He has just lost a nation that he thought he could control. That's a big enough problem, but the real problem for Putin is this: he has once again been exposed on the global stage. Ever since he invaded Ukraine, Putin has seen his allies drop like flies. He'd already made his country a pariah among the West with the invasion itself, but the last few years have seen him lose Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and Ali Khamenei in Iran. Those are three major allies that allowed Russia to exert its influence in Asia and South America. Adding to the pain is the loss that Russia absorbed just a couple of months before Armenia sent its message that it wants nothing more to do with Russia. Hungary, which is an EU member and was arguably Russia's biggest ally on the continent, did the exact same thing. Viktor Orban is out. A new government is in play in Hungary, and that means Putin has lost his ability to block EU measures by way of one of his puppets. This is what collapsing geopolitical influence looks like. Armenia's elections are just the latest example that all of the tampering and disinformation in the world can't hide the fact that Putin is a shriveled shrimp trying to play the role of geopolitical strongman. What is likely to happen next is the deepening of the diplomatic rift between Russia and Armenia. The Kremlin will play this off as though it's no big deal. The Kremlin is lying. As Armenia goes from drifting closer to the West to setting a dedicated course toward becoming a member of the EU, all that Putin and his cronies can do is watch as their machinations have failed once more. Before the Ukraine invasion, this sort of collapse would have been impossible to foresee, but Putin has shown his true colors, and former allies are becoming foes. Armenia just showed him why that matters. A country that Putin could count on as a trade ally and diplomatic buffer has just told Russia where to shove it. The fear is gone, and Putin knows it. He's watching Armenia's post-Soviet-era dependence on Russia slip away in real time. All of this, from the loss of Armenia to the collapse of Putin's geopolitical influence elsewhere, is a direct result of the war in Ukraine. Putin's focus has been placed too heavily on his invasion, which means that he's lost his touch elsewhere, and that isn't going to change. Right now, inside Ukraine, Russia has even bigger problems than Putin being backstabbed by Armenia. Russia's forces are running away from the Kinburn Spit, and that could change everything about the occupation of Crimea. Find out why by watching our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our analysis of the latest developments in European and global geopolitics. And thank you for watching.